Testing.
Okay, guys, we're going to be starting in just a couple of minutes. Wow, this is a bit loud. So I wanted to start off with something, kind of an intro. I've been starting to do this at PASS, usually before my sessions. I like showing off something we call the BI Power Hour. Have you guys heard of the BI Power Hour? So this isn't part of my actual session, but I just want to sort of show you guys what the Power Hour is and give you an idea of the type of sessions that we present there. Let's see if this works. So we only have a couple of minutes, and we're going to go through it pretty quick. This is my Power Hour presentation from last year. But so basically, the Power Hour is a way for the Microsoft product team to show off the Microsoft BI products in completely useless ways. One of the goals of the session is to be more entertaining than educational, okay? And so we have another BI Power Hour session. It's going to be tomorrow night, 5 o'clock. Highly recommend. It's a spotlight session. We're going to have some great audience. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through my whole demo here, but I just wanted to show you really quickly the things I've done in the past. So the first BI Power Hour I did, it was a while ago, and I was told that SSIS is not interesting and that I have to make SSIS interesting if I want to be part of the Power Hour. So I decided I was going to solve some real-life problems that I was facing. And at the time, I was really into Facebook. That's me from my LARPing days. That's me dressed as a druid. I was one of the cool kids in high school, or at least one of the cool druids. And I do lots of interesting things on Facebook. I'd post about what I was watching on TV, what I was eating, things like that. I had a couple of thousand pictures of my cat, Mr. Wiggles. And I'd post about all the funny things that Mr. Wiggles does, because Mr. Wiggles is the craziest cat. And everybody loves to read stories about other people's cats on the internet, right? We all know this. And despite my Facebook page being extremely interesting, I had one major problem, and it's that I had no friends. So this used to get me really sad. So what I ended up doing was writing these Facebook connectors that actually, connectors for SSIS that would actually go out and download my status updates from Facebook, and I had a chat transform that would generate comments, and then a Facebook destination that would post those comments back up to make it feel like I had friends, right? So all pretty standard stuff. I'm sure many of you have done something similar. But there was a weird side effect of doing that demo. It was in Tech Ed New Orleans, and there's like 600 people in the audience, and I became an international superstar because of this demo. And in fact, I became so popular, I had to use SSIS to manage my social life. I just got bombarded with friends requests. My Facebook page was just bombarded with friends. And so I had a couple of packages that you use to manage my social life. So this one here would process incoming friend requests. And so I decide, whether they were cat lovers or not. Mr. Wiggles and I are very selective over who we hang out with. And I'd redirect them down to my MySpace destination, or if they didn't make the cut, or my Facebook destination if I accepted. And another package that I'd post things like, hey guys, I'm hanging out in Charlotte tonight. Where should I go? And I'd get invites to a bunch of places. So I had this package here to sort help me figure out where I was going to hang out. After that, I went from being very popular, but it's hard when you're living that rock star lifestyle. Do you guys know that past presenters are like rock stars, right? We have groupies, parties, all that stuff, free T-shirts just everywhere. And so it's hard to meet that special someone. So I decided to solve another problem. I turned to online dating. I wanted to find that special someone. This was my original dating profile, which which was really popular. I got lots of messages, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I decided to turn to BI again to solve my problems. So I did some analysis. It's very interesting. I used BI to solve a non-business problem. Right? I went out and analyzed the statistics that different dating sites publish to see what kind of profiles get the most messages. And so I actually found a correlation between the type of camera you use and your average attractiveness. So here we see that replaceable lens, if you take a picture with a replaceable lens, on average you're more attractive than if you took a picture with a webcam. Of course, numbers don't tell everything. This doesn't necessarily mean that people who own replaceable lens cameras are better looking than webcam. It could just be about the photo quality. I drilled down further about the phone thing, though. It turns out that Windows Phone users are way more attractive than Android or iPhone users. And I don't think this has anything to do with phone quality or camera quality. Analyzing that the number of messages, the type of picture you have, so what you're doing in your picture affects the number of messages you get every month. This showed that your average attractiveness, so there's actually a fall off. If you're too attractive, you actually get less messages, right? Because people are intimidated. They don't think they have a stand a chance with you. And I was really worried I was falling at that upper end. So I had to do something specific to move my attractiveness down a little bit. And finally, this one was actually really interesting. So this is the number of times you can reference your cat in your online dating profile versus the number of messages. So you see a severe drop if you mention your cat more than once. This is my own research, unfortunately. Anyways, in the end, I updated my profile. It was better using that BI. And I solved my online dating problem with SSIS here. I had some custom SSIS components where I'd grab my dating profile sources and do some sorting and things like that. And it had varying degrees of success on my actual matches. Anyways. Power BI, so people just coming in. This was a quick intro to the BI Power Hour advertisement for our session tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I highly recommend you guys come. And yeah, I hope to see you all there. And now, I think we have time. We'll jump over to the real session. So, let me quickly introduce. Let me grab some water first. Is that up? OK. Pause for the recording. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Masson. I'm from Microsoft. I'm from the SQL Server Integration Services team. I'm joined here today by Hyong, who's also on the SSIS team. Hyong is actually responsible for most of the server improvements in SQL Server 2012, the same ones I usually take credit for myself when he's not around. So now that he's here, I can't claim credit. Yeah, anyways. There's a lot of people out there who think I'm the only person on the SSIS team because I do most of the talking, but that's definitely not the case. So here today, we're going to talk about the SQL Server Integration Services roadmap, which is actually kind of interesting because Microsoft doesn't do roadmap sessions in public venues usually. Usually it's an NDA or a partner-type meeting where we discuss roadmap stuff. So I was actually very surprised to see my name assigned to this session for PASS. It actually got me really excited because I love talking about this stuff. Before we get into that, let's just make a reminder. Please silence your cell phones. But I want to clarify by what we mean by roadmap. I should say virtual roadmap, OK? So just want to make sure that you guys are in the right session. Because like I said, usually Microsoft roadmap sessions are more of an NDA things because things change. Really, it's hard to predict in 2 or 3 years the exact direction that we're going to be in. Sometimes we cut features. Sometimes we add features at the end. So things kind of change. But this is what you can expect today. You won't be seeing a lot of new features for SQL Server 2014. If that's what you were hoping for, that we were saving the best for last type thing, that's not the case. SQL 2014 is really focused on the engine and the engine-related improvements. And there's a ton of great stuff about that. There's some smaller things for SSIS that I'll talk about in this session. You're also not going to see a definitive product plan. This isn't official in any way. And this is things that we've been thinking about, things that will probably be coming out, but it's definitely not guaranteed, and it's definitely not everything. It's not the entire roadmap. There's actually still some stuff for 2014 that will be coming out that I can't talk about yet. Right? Usually Microsoft only talks about things that are only out. There's a couple of different features that will be coming in later on in the release. So that's what you won't be seeing. The things you will be seeing, you'll see some new extensions and some connectors. You'll see cloud stuff. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but Microsoft talks about the cloud a lot. Actually, my yearly review is based on how many times I can fit the word cloud into a session. And I get double points for Azure. So you might hear me use those cloud Azure terms. They actually have an AI analyzing the recording, so it's great. You also see some non-binding release guidance. So I will be talking about some stuff we're doing. Like I said, things might change. Quick agenda. We sort of arranged this in things that are out now, things that are coming out soon, 2014, and then Power BI and the cloud-related stuff. Okay? So feel free to call out questions. I will probably be going through, well, if you've been to my sessions before, you know I usually go through things pretty quickly. I like to pack lots of content in. If you have questions, feel free to call them out. We'll also leave some time for Q&A at the end as well. So first up, I want to talk about a couple of things that are already out on CodePlex that you might not know about. How many people are using this reporting pack from Jamie Thomson? Okay. How many people have never heard of this before, have never seen this before, didn't know about it? Okay, good, about half the room. Okay, good. So this is what I was worried about. So this is a reporting pack from Jamie Thomson. Has anybody never read a Jamie Thomson blog post for SSIS? One person. Okay. Yeah, so Jamie Thomson's been a long-time SSIS blogger. I actually learned SSIS from reading his blog posts when I first started with the team in 2006. Jamie created this SSIS report pack for SQL Server 2012. SQL Server 2012, we moved to this new project deployment model. You deploy to the SSIS catalog, and all of the logging gets captured automatically. We provide some default reports that ship, that come as part of SSMS. Jamie created his own reporting pack that you can install and integrate into your own SSRS systems. It lets you do more detailed reporting. It's using the same public reporting APIs that we use for our reports, so he's just exposing the data and visualizing in different ways. So quick show of hands, how many people here are on 2012? Okay, so more than half the room. And how many people are using the project deployment model? Same, okay, that's great to see. How many people in 2008? 2008, 2005? 2000? I'm sorry. Okay, so yes, definitely check out this report pack. It's a free download from CodePlex. You can download it, install it, and it integrates into SSRS. Jamie has some really cool visualization. I really like this Gantt chart visualization. So it shows your entire package execution and where time is being spent on each of your executables within that execution. The latest release, if you haven't seen the latest release, there's also a new stored procedure that he released called the USP SSIS catalog. That actually lets you get the SQL data behind all the data that's going into the reports. He even has a neat Gantt chart breakdown using T-SQL with ASCII art and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. Anybody using DQS? A couple people? A few people? Actually, yeah, that's good. That's a number of people. So data quality services, new product in SQL Server 2012. In 2012, DQS has an SSIS cleansing transformation, so you can do cleansing from SSIS, but we didn't ship a DQS matching transformation. But thankfully, the kind people at OH22 Data have released a CodePlex components that kind of bridge that gap that we currently have in the DQS SSIS integration story, and that's available now on CodePlex. Anybody using these currently? A couple of people. Has anybody not seen this? First time you've seen this? Never heard of this before? Okay, good. I am glad I did that. I kept debating about whether or not to include this CodePlex stuff in here, but I think it's really valuable. I'm going to show a demo of how we can make use of this in end-to-end EIM scenarios. But basically, we have a DQS matching component. It does deduplication. And using this transformation, you can automate your matching based on your matching policy you define in data quality services. And I'll show a demo on that in a bit. It's going to capture the matched and unmatched data. And finally, it reuses all the DQS-specific columns. So if you're familiar with the DQS flows and the way you deal with the different metadata columns, this transformation works right in there. They also created another task that lets you bulk load domain values into a DQS domain. So usually in DQS, you define everything through a client. You can import from Excel. This lets you import into a DQS domain directly from SSIS. And I'll show a demo for this as well. So on the left there, we're doing a split and actually publishing into a DQS domain in parallel. The other transformation lets you actually publish the DQS domain. So with DQS, you have a concept of a project. Things are active, and it doesn't become official until you actually publish it. And so I'll show what that flow looks like as well. And of course, it lets you do the define, reuse all the DQS concepts of having domain values that are good, that are bad, and that like the concept of synonyms and things like that. So let me jump into my first demo. Make sure I'm just up and running here. And this one mine? This one's mine. OK. So here we have SSIS. And let me just make sure Zoom it's running. OK. So the first thing I wanted to show was the fuzzy grouping transform. So this is basically how you do deduplication today in SSIS. Anybody use fuzzy grouping? Usually? OK, only a few people. So fuzzy grouping is a way to do deduplication. You send your values in. It's going to compare the different rows, identify duplicates, and lets you sort it out later. Fuzzy grouping is pretty limited on what you can actually specify on how you're going to match. You basically have two options. You have an exact match or a fuzzy match. And it uses its own algorithm to determine how similar two rows are going to be. And you have some configuration options like the minimum similarity, and you can set how two strings should be compared, how numbers should be compared, and things like that. So here I'm going to import data from source. It has a mix of new rows and old rows. I'm going to run this, and we'll see what this looks like after running through fuzzy grouping. So there's three main columns that come out of fuzzy grouping. There's the key in, which is an original unique identifier for that value. There's a key out, which if key out isn't equal to key in, it means it was matched with another row. And then we have a score. A score of 1 means that it's a unique row. A score of less than 1 means that it was found to be similar with another row. So if we look through it, matched, for example, I have 3 restaurants here that are similarly named. The Hungry Coyote restaurant and bar. But I see that actually only 2 of them were matched together. So we see this record here is 59, and they match to this one. And the reason why fuzzy grouping probably didn't match it is because one of them has an address defined and one of them doesn't. Right? So we see how fuzzy grouping works. It's an effective way to do matching. This way, there's the advantage of fuzzy grouping is you don't have to prepare beforehand. You're not defining rules. You're not defining knowledge base. It's just going to do brute force string comparison, which works for small data sets. For larger data sets, that brute force comparison can get pretty expensive. So in the end, we had 67 rows coming in, and we identified 5 duplicates, and then the rest were deemed non-duplicate. OK. So that was a quick review of fuzzy grouping. Let's talk about the DQS matching component. And the reason why I wanted to include this as part of the DQS, as part of the SSIS roadmap session, is because this fills an immediate gap now that I'm seeing with the end-to-end SSIS, DQS, and MDS integration. And so I really wanted to call these out. So I set up my data flow in a very similar way. I have my SSIS source pulling in my data. Then I have a DQS matching component. And it looks a lot like the DQS cleansing component. I have my list of knowledge bases. I have my list of domains that I can map to. I map my incoming columns with my domains that are found in DQS. Okay? And that's it. So let's take a look at DQS itself. So within DQS, you can define what's called a matching policy. And I apologize for the resolution. DQS doesn't like the 1024 resolution. But basically, you set different matching rules. Okay, so if you're doing general data matching, the brute force way, like the fuzzy grouping does it, is you compare every single string with every single other string and check similarity, and there's different algorithms, n-grams, and things like that to determine your similarity. DQS can do that, but you can also make it smarter, right? If you're matching two people, for example, you can assign weights to different columns. Say that if two people's last names match, that's probably more likely to be a hit than if their first names match or if their state matches. If two people's social security numbers match, that's a much more definite likelihood that they're the same people, right? And you can build up these matching policies for all the different fields. So for example, I have different fields here like address and city and postal code, and I assign different weight percentages to them, okay? As I can do that all within DQS, and I can have different matching policies and rules and things like that. And DQS has this nice matching profiler, so you can actually run and test with a data set. It's going to do the match and show you a breakdown of your matched versus unmatched rows. You can try different policies, and it will compare, show you changes between two policies and things like that. And in the end, in DQS, you can then export those matching results if you want. But we're SSIS people, we're interested in automating, and that's what you can do with these new components here. So the DQS matching component lets you take advantage of what you've defined in that DQS knowledge base. So you can actually have a data steward or somebody expert on matching go in and change that policy without actually impacting your SSIS package. Your package continues to work without modification. Okay? So I'm going to match that same data, but with a tuned policy, a tuned matching policy, and we'll see what that looks like. You see that there's a number of different fields that come in. These are coming in from DQS, like a record ID, which is a unique identifier, a cluster ID. It's going to cluster matching records together. And then there's some other fields in there that aren't that interesting. Their matching score, that's their similarity and things like that. Let's just run through this. So in the end, with that same data, I saw 20 rows were identified as matches. Of those, I filter out what we call pivots. The pivot row is the one that you want to keep. So it's what DQS calls the leading value. So if you have a bunch of rows matching, you want to keep the pivot. And so in the end, I found 10 duplicate rows that I could filter out versus the 5 I would have found with the fuzzy group run. So automated matching, very important. One thing to call out is fuzzy matching. With smaller data set sizes, fuzzy matching can be faster than DQS. Larger data set sizes, DQS is typically faster than fuzzy because of the brute force it does. If you do matching with a really simple policy in DQS, it's probably going to be about the same as fuzzy because it's just doing string by string. The power of DQS matching is that you can tune your policy. You can say which rows are more important than others. You can specify exact matches. There's lots of information about DQS matching out there. But yeah, anyways, it's great functionality. Next thing I want to show is importing domain values in DQS. One of the things that the DQS team unfortunately didn't get a chance to do is add automation APIs and stuff to DQS. Everything revolves around the client. And while you can do bulk imports from Excel, a very common task is I have reference data somewhere. I want to import that into DQS to make sure my list of domain values in DQS stays in sync with something. And that's what I want to show here with this new transformation called the DQS domain value import. So let me show my knowledge base first. I have a knowledge base for colors. This is where a domain called colors, and I'm going to define all my different colors in here. It starts off empty. DQS has a concept of null, and that's the only thing in here. Now, if I import my values, forget that it's coming from MDS. I'll talk about that next. But if I import my domain values, this could be a bulk from any SSIS source. It's going to go straight in. I should have 4 records. It goes straight into my knowledge base. I have a couple of different options on how I match. The top is where I specify my DQS information. The middle columns, the middle settings are where I specify which column is my name, what type of value, is it a good value, a bad value, and I can specify synonyms too. I'll talk about that after. I have a couple options here, too, about what happens with failures. I can ignore them, or I can send them to an error output. Publishing is an important concept in DQS, because usually you'll have one knowledge base that's shared across your organization. And there's usually some sort of sign-off process or some sort of DQS admin who's going to go and review before a knowledge base gets published. So in this case, in my automated process, isn't going to publish it. It's just going to add the values so somebody can go and actually review it. And that's what I'll do now. So if I come in, I see that my DQS knowledge base colors is locked. And if I click Next and Domain Values, I can see those new values that I just added, right, that I bulk inserted into. The domain admin would then click Finish to actually publish this up. And now my domain is public, my knowledge base is published, and my other systems can start making use of it. Next thing I wanted to show was a cool MDS integration point that this introduces. Anybody using MDS out there? OK, about half. So MDS honestly took me a while to wrap my head around. I know it's for managing master data, but master data is an overloaded term, and it seemed really complicated to me, like new concepts, and I don't like learning new concepts because I have to forget old ones and things like that. So the way MDS made sense for me was if you are using SSIS and you're using lookups, and you can picture managing your lookup reference data with Excel, use MDS. That's where the power of MDS comes in. You can start adding additional sign-off things, and MDS has a lot of capabilities, but for its most basic usage, if you can imagine managing your reference data in Excel, or if you're using SharePoint lists or something like that today to manage your reference data, consider using MDS. I'll show this cool integration point. Whoops. So this is MDS. MDS has an Excel add-in here. This is that same, I've defined my values here within MDS. And I'm going to add my new domain values in MDS and then import them from MDS into SSIS, into DQS using SSIS. So what's a good color? Purple. And I have a drop-down for my value type, and purple, yes, is a color I accept. What's a good synonym for red? Anybody? Rosen? Crimson. Crimson is a good one. OK, crimson. So I'm going to say crimson. No, it is not a color. And it is a synonym of red. Here's my favorite trivia question. In DQS, what's the difference between an error and an invalid record? Nobody? So the answer was invalid doesn't pass a validation rule? No. No one? No? Nothing. There is no difference. I was going to give a book away to the right answer, but there is no difference between invalid. Just the error message, just basically the logging message that comes out. Originally, there was a lot more meaning behind error and invalid, but it ends up, basically my recommendation is whatever you have in your organization, just pick one and go with it. So I'm going to say that's an invalid value. Let's add white. White's a good color. And let's say that's valid. I'm also going to add, oh, I do have white. You're right. OK, let's change that. This is going to be a synonym for null. OK, so null in DQS can mean an actual null value. It can mean an empty string. It can mean NA. It can mean anything that you define. So here I'm going to define NA in my organization is an equivalent of null, but I'm going to say, no, correct this to actually have null. And I put my synonym in here. And let's just put in another color here. Yellow, and I'll say that's valid. Cool. So now I publish to MDS. Again, colors are very simple, but this could be anything. This could be your customer list. This could be your product list. This could be any dimension, basically, you have in BI. You can be managing it with MDS. And you have full versioning, and you have multi-user support, and you have hanging when you're demoing it in front of an audience. Usually this is like instant. But MDS caches information, so it's really fast when you're using it, but when you leave it running on your VM in the background, it likes to hang when you're talking in front of 200 people. So now I've published that. Let me run this. I'm going to change one thing. I'm actually going to publish my knowledge base this time. I'll say always publish. Run through this. And so this should import the rest of my values. And if I go to DQS and open up my knowledge base here, and go to domain values, I see those new values that I've imported. Okay, so this was a very cool functionality from OH22 data. The components are available for free on Codeplex. Definitely check them out. Let me switch back to Podium PC. Okay. And is this working? No. So that was DQS, the new DQS extensions, and I showed MDS a bit too. I really like talking about MDS. We're getting more and more, it seems like we're getting more and more MDS adoption these days. I get a lot more questions about it. Up next, I want to talk about stuff that's not available yet, but will be available in the near future. It's more about extensions for SSIS and extending SSIS. So one of the things that we've really been looking at is adopting a model where we have more out-of-band releases, so you don't have to wait for a full release. We release more connectors for SSIS, because there's lots of different things to connect to. We're also looking at taking a model that is like what the HDinsight team does with their SDK, for example. They have what's called an experimental release model. So what they do is they release something in experimental forms, usually to Codeplex. If there's enough community interest in it, then they'll go through the effort of turning it into product fully supported and everything like that. Because really, that's the biggest cost for the SSIS team. Creating an SSIS extension isn't that much work. It's making sure it's bulletproof and it's localized and it's supported and all that. That's where the cost comes in. So we think that by adopting this experimental model, we're able to release more functionality and the functionality that matters, that people actually want. Okay? Good clapping. Thank you. You also see an increased focus on hybrid scenarios. By hybrid, I mean combining on-prem and cloud, specifically Azure. Get my bonus points in there. Some things I'll talk about specifically right now, connectivity for different Azure services, like Windows Azure SQL Database, Azure Storage, like blob storage and table storage, and of course HDinsight, which I'll talk about as well. First up, so the SQLCAT team has developed some new components that will be released very shortly. They might actually be up right now. I will be posting links to all this stuff on my blog as well, mattmason.com. First up, we have a new component called the SSIS Sharding destination. So sharding in Azure is when you have multiple Azure databases and you're splitting based on a key, or you're splitting based on location, or you're splitting your data across multiple databases to make it scale better. Right? Using SSIS, you typically have a destination for each shard, each Azure shard you're going to. What the sharding destination does is it lets you point to a metadata or a partitioning function, usually reads from a SQL Server table, and tells you what all the shards are and how to shard the data. So as the data is coming in, it will basically multicast the data out to multiple destinations at once. So you have a single SSIS data flow, regular data flow like you do, with a sharding destination that's going to go to multiple SQL Azure databases, or Windows, what is it called? Windows Azure SQL Database, sorry. Can't call it SQL Azure anymore. That would make too much sense. We have Azure Blob Source and Blob Destination. So these components are meant to work together, actually in the reverse order. Okay. The first step, this is so the common scenario here is I have data on-prem and I want to process it in the cloud. I want to load it from a cloud application, or I'm running SSIS in an Azure VM and I want to process it up there. On-prem, you'd have an SSIS data flow package that uses the blob destination. It compresses the data with the metadata, writes it to blob storage. Then you run another process in the cloud with the blob source that reads the data from blob storage and writes it to your SQL destination in the cloud. These are fault-tolerant components, so if there's any connectivity issues or anything like that, it will recover. You'll find that starting the process on-prem and finishing on the cloud will give you better end-to-end performance than if you were going from on-prem straight to the databases for really large data sizes. There's some SQLCAT white papers out there that talk about this process end-to-end. Basically, they took these best practices and created some new SSIS data flow components for these. And they're going to be released in that experimental stage that I talked about. Okay. Next up, we have Windows Azure HDinsight. Is anybody using HDinsight currently? Okay. Anybody plan to, or heard about Hadoop, or saw the cool demos and plan to start taking a look at it? Okay. So, of course, HDinsight is Microsoft's version of Hadoop for Azure, right? There's a session tomorrow that goes into depth about this stuff, but quickly, there's advantages. To me, the main advantage with HDinsight on Azure is that you're not investing in resources beforehand. You just spin up what you need. You provision your HDinsight cluster, you do your work, you shut it down, and that's it. You pay for your processing cost. You don't have to build your own cloud of machines yourself. And it leverages the Windows ecosystem. It lets you take advantage of a lot of this stuff. So quickly, the general flow for HDinsight processing, right? There's actually a lot of overlap with regular ETL processing that you do in SSIS. It's just typically at a bigger scale. Okay, so the typical scenario is log data. I have machine-generated data, or I have lots of log data. I'm analyzing click streams. I think we did a demo about Xbox or Skype, right? Massive amounts of data that are going to the log files that are being collected in different places. First step is to get that data and store it somewhere like Azure storage, Azure Blob Storage. So collecting it, maybe compressing it, sending it to a storage location. And then using HDinsight and the Hadoop platform, the different Hadoop technologies, you're going to shape the data, you do the MapReduce stuff, you run your Hive queries, your pig tasks to actually shape the data and run their queries to get the data into a format that you can consume. And then you take that consumable format, so all those gigs and terabytes of data, down to a consumable format for BI. You export that, what we call the last mile export, from your Hadoop system, from the HDinsight system, to your regular BI tools, so SQL Server, your data marts, or things like that. So let me show you really quick what that looks like using SSIS. So actually, before I do that, I'm having a VM issue. So I'm just going to do my interpretive SSIS dance while this is loading. But yeah, basically, OK, here we go. Let me switch over. Let me reconnect. OK, so basically we're going to be releasing a set of connectors of HDinsight tasks for SSIS that let you do that flow that I just talked about, the acquiring the data and all that processing, orchestrating the end-to-end HDinsight processing from within SSIS. Okay? There's actually two sets of components here. Unfortunately, I have a limited network connection, so I can't actually run this at the moment. But trust me, it runs. We have a couple of different sets of tasks. Let me just, for some reason, Zoom it's not working. OK. We have some tasks that deal with storage. These will probably be renamed to Azure Blob Storage, specifically around Azure, but things that let you upload a file to Blob Storage, that let you copy a blob file from one location to another, things like that. So lets you do that first phase of collecting your data and getting it into a format that HDinsight can consume. There's then a set of HDinsight tasks, big Hadoop things. If you're familiar with Hadoop, you'll notice the different jobs that HDinsight supports. So running things like Hive queries or pig, MapReduce jobs, scoop exports. Scoop is a way to take the format, take the data out of Hive and into a database location, a relational database. And we have streaming MapReduce, which lets you actually embed .NET code or .NET assembly and submit that as a MapReduce job rather than using Java jar files, like a regular MapReduce job. Okay? And so your end-to-end, so if I talk about this flow, on the left here, we're actually checking whether a cluster exists, and if it doesn't exist, we're actually going to create it. So this is the dynamic. We call this the transient HDinsight pattern, where you provision your cluster, do your work, delete your cluster, so your cluster is not running and incurring charges when you're not using it. We have an enumerator. We have an Azure Blob enumerator. Actually, it's going to go through Azure Blob storage and can copy blobs from one location to another. Here, I'm just simply uploading from a local file. I submit 3 Hive jobs. I'm going to build a table, and then I have 3 jobs that run in parallel. And then finally, I export that to Scoop. And at the end of this flow, I could then delete my cluster. So that's end-to-end automation of HDinsight or orchestration of HDinsight using SSIS. Any questions about that? Yeah? So the question is it only for HDinsight, or will it work with HTTP? It should work with HTTP as well. So we're trying to make it, if it works, because yeah, HDP and HDinsight, same thing, this is going to be as well. These components will work against HDP as well. Any other questions? Yeah? So this is going to be most likely start off as an experimental release on CodePlex. So you download the components from CodePlex, install them. If there's enough interest, then they become supported components, and we'll roll them out from that. Timeline, we are shooting for, I'm not allowed to say dates, we're shooting for around the general availability release date of HDinsight, which I can't talk about. Question behind? Yeah. Oh, it's the same question? OK. Anything else about HDinsight or SSIS? No? OK. So let me switch back. OK. So quick recap. 3 main sets of components for HDinsight here. We have cluster management and acquiring files, so new blob storage tasks, new Azure storage stuff. You can imagine we do things with Azure Tables and Azure Database as well. You can orchestrate your HDinsight jobs, your Hive, your Pig, things like that. Export from HDinsight using Scoop to a relational database. And then finally, you do your last mile stuff, like using an SSIS data flow to retrieve the data from the staging tables, bring it into your data mart, and then delete your cluster once you're done. Quick summary. Pre-release, it's going to come out for 2012, and it's going to be coming out soon. That's all I can say. SSIS, you can do all these things. I love the colorful icons that Hadoop has. And there's lots of potential enhancements. I can picture a whole number of things, especially around data flow connectivity in Hive, for example, right? A Hive destination, a Hive source, and things like that. Again, we're moving to this experimental model. If it's something you need, it's something you'd like, something you want, let us know. It makes it easier for us to actually build this stuff. OK, let's talk about SQL Server 2014. So I mentioned this earlier. Main focus for 2014 was the engine and on hybrid SQL Server scenarios. So there's tons of great feature. People compare it to 2008 R2 as a minor release. I'd say it's a lot more than a minor release. There's actually a ton of great features. It's just not on the EIM side. It's not on the SSIS side. Really, the focus was for this engine. So the in-memory OLTP, or formerly known as Hekaton. There's enhanced column store stuff. There's always-on improvements. There's the new Windows Azure integration scenarios. So there's lots of cool features. On the EIM side, there's a couple of new SSIS features that I'll talk about in a bit. Some other things that I can't talk about yet. But it's mostly a bug roll-up for DQS, MDS, and SSIS. Now, we're not at our GA date yet. That might change. There might be other things. But as of now, that's probably what is going to be. Really, 2014 is about the engine release. And we're going to be focusing on vNext instead. Anybody connect to SharePoint from SSIS, or has ever needed to connect to SharePoint from SSIS? OK, so more than half the room. So this is one of our most common feature requests for connectors. And there's actually a number of options out there on how to do it. We actually have a white paper out there. It's like the white paper on how to build your own SSIS extensions. It does an end-to-end implementation of a SharePoint source and a SharePoint destination of how to do that. We also have our SharePoint list adapters on CodePlex. Anybody using those ones? OK, so most of the people have had their hands up. So interesting thing about those components is they're actually used in production at Microsoft. They're actually developed by somebody in MSIT. Name is Kevin Idze, who we completely abuse and get his free work to put up on CodePlex. And yeah, they're actually widely used. They're our most popular CodePlex download. There's also a number of third-party components out there. The major SSIS partners all have their own SharePoint connectors. So if you're looking for more of a supported solution targeted at SharePoint, these third-party solutions work really well. So we actually saw the demand for this. We were going to add it ourselves, and we talked to the SharePoint folks, and they said, well, wait, SharePoint in 2010 actually added an OData interface. Right? So anybody using OData? Commonly, OData? OK, about half the room. So SharePoint now exposes all of their data, all their list data, everything within SharePoint is accessible through OData. And they made further enhancements in 2013. So for us, it made sense to actually, instead of doing a SharePoint source, doing an OData source in SSIS. Okay. Woo. Yeah. So in case you don't know, OData is a standard, open standard of representing data, right? Representing schema, representing data. And there's a number of different ways that OData will express that data. It can express it in XML, the Atom format, like the RSS format. That's a very verbose format. OData has also added some more complex, more efficient formats, JSON formats, JSON-Lite formats. That's a more efficient way of representing data. But anyways, it's basically a standard way of doing it. It's very popular with web applications, and you'll see it very common across the Microsoft stack. More and more things are exposing their data. If they're exposing their internal data in any way, it's going to be through OData. Okay. So OData source will let you connect to SharePoint lists. It lets you connect to Windows Azure table storage. All the Azure stuff exposes OData interfaces over their APIs. Windows Azure Marketplace. Anybody using Marketplace? Getting data from Marketplace? If you haven't heard of it, the data market has a lot of commercial data sets. Some are free, some you pay for, but a great repository of data. And everything gets exposed through OData you can consume in SSIS directly. Of course, you can write your own custom OData services as well. It's built into WCF data services. You easily expose any data set as OData internally and then consume them from SSIS. So we were releasing for SQL Server 2012. We're also looking into, I can't confirm this, but we're also looking into a 2012 version as well. So it might be an early preview version coming out to support 2012. Okay. SSDTBI. So this was actually, yeah, question about OData? OData destination is not there yet. We're doing the source. OData destination is definitely possible. One thing about OData destinations is they don't always support bulk interfaces, and there's some, it's not like, source is a standard way of consuming data. The destination is a bit trickier. So to do that as a generic destination was a bit more difficult. That said, writing a script component destination that dumps to OData is fairly easy. But again, that's the type of feedback that we're looking for. SQL Server data tools. So you'll notice that the install for 2014 does not include the data tools. So this is actually the case when CTP 1 came out. I was on vacation. I was at Disneyland. And there was a panic that spread across the SSIS community. Oh my gosh, SSIS has been removed from SQL Server 2014 because the tools weren't in there anymore. And I remember checking my phone. I'm at Disneyland and looking and seeing all these panicked emails from customers saying that, has SSIS been deprecated? Has SSIS been taken out? Is gone? But no, that's not the case. Basically, we split up. Right now, the designer, so what we used to call BIDS, the SQL Server Data Tools Business Intelligence Edition, because we like those long acronyms, is now a separate download from the Microsoft Download Center. So we first did that with Visual Studio 2012. Anybody using the 2012 tools? Okay, and everybody else is on 2010, I guess. But it basically decouples the tools, so the designer stuff, from the box release, the server release. So one interesting thing in talking to customers, you can usually tell their role by how often they like releases of SQL Server. So if you talk to a developer, it usually applies for ETL developers, they want like monthly to 6-month releases. They love those fast release cycles. Talk to a DBA, 3 years, no, they're happy with the 3 years. Talk to IT, 6 to 8 years, right? So releasing the tools separately from the server means we can actually release on a faster cadence, right? Tools to support cloud services that we're working on, right? Different enhancements that we can ship faster, that we're no longer locked into that 3-year or 2-year release cycle for stuff. So I'm actually really excited about the opportunity that this creates for us. Okay. So just a quick version matrix. So of course, SQL Server 2012 was released with Visual Studio 2010. We then released a download for 2012 that is available. 2014, CTP2 is going to come out with a version of Visual Studio for 2012. And then we're going to be coming out with a Visual Studio 2013 version sometime around GA for SQL Server for 2014. Can't talk release dates, but that's the current plan, that VS 2013 is going to be supported. Yep. So the comment was, we don't have download checkboxes for VS 2014 for 2012. Yeah, I think that's still up in the air. The version that will come out for CTB2 will still be there. It should still work. I don't know if it's going to be, if we're going to support it moving forward or not. We might just support 2013. But when the next version of Visual Studio comes out, we can be much faster in release, and we're going to keep going. It's impossible for us to support every single past version of Visual Studio. We're going to have a rolling window, but we're going to be doing it. Yeah. Visual Studio 2013 for SQL Server 2012? No, we don't plan to do that at this point. The last release for SQL Server 2012 is going to be VS 2012. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. OK, one more thing. This is purely experimental. But Microsoft has been embracing this thing called NuGet or NuGet, or however you want to pronounce it. But NuGet is basically, if you're developing, you can reference these packages and dynamically download packages to include as part of your development process. And so if you're doing SSIS extensibility, if you're doing programmatic package generation or using the SSIS API in any way, we thought these components might be useful for you. So there's a thing called Easy API up on Codeplex, basically a higher level interface for dynamically generating SSIS packages. So we're looking to releasing that as a NuGet package, as well as a new extensibility API. So easier way to generate to create your own custom tasks and custom extensions coming out in the same way. So if you're interested in that, let us know through the forums, through the blogs, things like that. OK. Now, Power BI and the cloud. And now this is what Hyong is here for. He's the expert. And so let's start talking about this.
So one of the things to take note of, right, is that as we work through the various SQL Server releases, especially SSIS, one of the things that has been coming back very often, right, is to say, hey, I have been using SSIS to load or to shape data and to load it into a data warehouse, right? What if I don't have to do that? What if I don't need to land the data in the data warehouse? What if I want to have the ability to say, take the output of SSIS package and make it available as a data feed, right? And that's what this is about. What if you can do a select star on the SSIS data flow, right? Because once you can do that, the possibilities are endless, right? You could say, well, you have multiple SSIS packages. Without landing data in any intermediate storage, you could chain them together, right? Now, what I'm going to show you is what we're going to call the data feed publishing components. Right now, these data feed publishing components are available as part of the Power BI scenarios, right? But at the same time, this does not limit it to just Power BI scenarios, right? You could be using it, exposing the output of an SSIS package as a T-SQL view, right? At the same time, you could say, hey, if you have been going to many of the Power BI talks there's today as well as upcoming tomorrow, right? You might be saying, using SSIS to shape the data the way you want it, and eventually making the output of SSIS package, right, as an old data feed, right? In the session that we do tomorrow, we're going to show how you can do that. And at the same time, if you have reports, right, you have been building SSRS reports, if you have been using Power View, you have been using Power Pivot, you're saying, hey, I do not just want data that comes from a table or a view. Before it even lands into this kind of reporting kind of capability, I want to shape the data, I want to be able to do lookups, I want to be able to do things like, for example, cleansing, right? So earlier on, you have seen Matt doing a demo where he made use of the DQS components, right? In a demo that I'm going to show later, I'm going to take the same demo and show you how easy it is, right, to turn this SSIS package that Matt has developed earlier, right, into something that can be easily consumable as a data feed, right? And most importantly, this set of components, which right now we're calling it the data feed publishing component, right, is available as a Microsoft download. I'm going to show you where you can download that.
So there's, what's in the components?
Yeah. So then the question is, what do I need in order to do this wonderful thing, the ability to select star from an SSIS data flow, right? Now, once you download the data feed publishing component, you essentially get three things out of the box, right? One is what we call the OLEDB provider for SSIS. Now, as we get to that, right, some folks might ask to say, hey, why OLEDB, right? Why not some other kind of provider? Now, the truth is, today, if you integrate with SQL Server and you want to be able to expose data as link server queries, right, the only kind of provider that will integrate into SQL Server is OLEDB providers, right? So that's one, which you'll see later in the demo. Two is, in order to enable you to take an SSIS package, right, and to enable this SSIS package to be available as a data feed, right, you need some sort of a destination. You can see this destination as a placeholder. Everything that goes into this destination somehow magically appears at the other end of it, right, as result set that you can consume in SQL Server. And of course, the third piece that you'll need, right, is when we initially delivered this data feed publishing component to customers on a private preview, one of the feedback that they gave us was to say, hey, you know, you gave us an OLEDB provider, you gave us a data streaming destination, but the amount of effort needed for me to even get to the point where I can have a data feed is just too much effort, right? So in order to address that, one of the things that we would deliver as well is what we call a data feed publishing wizard. And it's as simple as saying pointing the wizard to an SSIS package that you have published to an SSIS catalog, right? And going through a series of steps, clicking next, 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 and eventually it publishes a view. If there are settings on SQL Server that needs to be set, it will tell you about it. If the design of your SSIS package does not allow it to be available as a data feed, it will tell you about it as well. So the wizard somehow simplifies the job of you publishing a SSIS package as a data feed. Right. Now, before we go into the demo, this is essentially what the demo will cover. A typical ask, as I've shared earlier, is you want to say, I want to be able to see on-demand log activities on my web servers. Right. Today, you might have saying, hey, you know, what happens if your logs, your web servers, right, are restricted access? The only way you can connect to the web servers is via FTP, right? How can you then answer this very basic requirement that your business users have asked you, right? To say, hey, you know, go to each of the web servers, pull the logs, make it available on demand so that I can have a dashboard that always tells me about activities that's happening on my web servers, right? So what I'm going to show you in the demo is how you can accomplish that using this set of components that I've talked about, right? I'm going to switch to the demo. Now, so what you see here right now, right, is the exact same package. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. Now, what you see here right now is this exact same package that Matt ran earlier, frozen in time, right? And what I'm going to do right now, right, is to say, hey, you know what, if I do not want to land this in a row count, what if I want to land this in what we call a data streaming destination? So if you were to take a look at this, after you install it, one of the things that you'll see in your SSIS toolbox is this component called data streaming destination. Now, you can imagine the data streaming destination as just a placeholder, right? It takes care of all the underlying plumbing, right, that eventually sends it to SQL Server as a data feed. Now, if I were to run this package in SSDT-BI, oops, sorry. Let's stop this for a while. Let me just drag the data streaming destination into this. And all I need to do is to just connect it up, right? Now, if I were to run this in SSDT-BI, nothing really happens in the background, right, because it's just a placeholder. If I were to enable a data viewer on this and to run this, right, again, it goes through, pulls data from a source, goes through the DQS matching, right, does a union of the results, and eventually landing it in a virtual placeholder, right? You'll see that the results that is sent there look something like this.
So has anybody used the data reader destination component in SSIS? Okay, this is actually very similar in concept to the data reader destination, except for it's newer, so it's better.
I think the other thing to add to that, right, is that for a while, right, when we say in bits or SSDT-BI, you have a data viewer destination, right? One of the hidden gems in SQL Server 2012 or SSIS 2012 is that even after you have deployed the SSIS package to the SSIS catalog and you run it on a server environment where you do not have bits or SSDT-BI installed, there's this capability called data tabs where you can decoratively use T-SQL to say you want to place a data tab on one part of a data flow and then making it available as a file, which you can then do investigation and stuff like that, right? Just a piece of trivia. So once I'm done with this, right, what do I do, right? I say, hey, you know, this is just a package. Let me deploy this to an SSIS catalog, which is something that for folks that's already using SSIS 2012, you're very familiar with. Connect to the SSIS catalog, right? And I say, hey, let me deploy it to the SQL Pass Submit 2013 folder. So right now, at this point in time, I'm deploying an SSIS project. Nothing spectacular about it, right? With a package that contains a data streaming destination.
So for your poor people still on 2008, just quick summary. One of the cool features in 2012 is this whole concept of you take an SSIS package or your set of SSIS packages and bundle it up into a single project file or ISPack or IcePack file that becomes your deployable unit. You can deploy your entire solution together, and you deploy it to the SSIS server, which was also introduced in 2012. Question? The question is, does it require it to be published to the server? Yes, and so you'll see why, because the way we expose these data types actually comes down to exposing it as a linked server, so it really only makes sense if it's all running in process. Like I said, this functionality is similar to the data reader destination, and you can do the data reader destination outside of the server, but there's some enhancements here that you might be interested in.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to do right now that the project has already been deployed to an SSIS catalog, I'm going to start the other piece, which is the wizard, right? Now, what this wizard allows you to do is to say, hey, connect to the SSIS catalog, find the project that I've deployed, which is called DQS matching, find the package, right? In this case, it's the data feed original package. And once I click OK, it's going to say, hey, this package has some parameters. You want to set values on them, right? And once you're done with this, you click Next. It says, okay, I'm at the point where I'm ready to publish this. And what am I publishing? I'm publishing this SSIS package definition as a view in SQL Server. And later on, I'll show you how to do select star on it. So at this point, that package has successfully published. A view has been created on a SQL Server, right, database. And once I click Next, I'm publishing it.
Yeah, that was the validation. So that's actually one of the things I liked about this wizard is it does a full validation. It makes sure your SQL is configured properly. It makes sure your package is configured properly. It will give you warnings. It will tell you exactly what you need to do to make sure that the data feed functionality works for your SQL instance. Was there a question? Oh, the sound?
Sorry?
Oh, is the sound off? No?
It should be on.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Oh. Can you hear me now? Early on, it should be loud enough that it projects to the back.
There we go.
Okay. Now,
thank you.
Now that it has been published, let me show you what it looks like on the database. And the connection is down. Oops. Let me try connecting to it again.
I have the wired connection if you need it. But yeah, so one of the joys of demoing against live cloud services is connectivity, and also weekly updates. It's a whole new world of service updates. So you're actually demoing against a live service that could change while you're demoing, which is always very interesting.
It's coming up.
Okay. So I'll just get mine running just in case.
Okay. Nope.
Or maybe we could talk about the different scenarios too if
Okay, we are back.
Okay.
Now, if we go to the SQL Server instance, one of the things I've created here is a database called Pass Demo Scratch. And if you were to take a look at this, right, there were several views that have been published. Now, let us take a look at the view definition. And essentially what the wizard has done is to say, hey, you know, create a view, right? The data that is coming for this view, right, is from a link server query, right, which says open query, connect to SSIS package. This is the SSIS package that you will connect to for datafeed.dtsx. And that's it, right? If I were to do a select star on this view, you'll see that right now what's happening in the background is that it's issuing the link server query. Now, the link server query, because it's using an SSIS OLEDB provider, at the back end is kickstarting the SSIS package. Now, the SSIS package is actually running, right? As the SSIS package runs, it goes through the DQ components, does the matching. Now, instead of landing it somewhere, it lands it in the data streaming destination. Now, in a pipeline kind of manner, it gets streamed back to SQL Server, and the data gets returned as a result set, right? In tomorrow, one of the sessions that Matt and I are having, we'll show you what it takes to, say, take whatever that you see here and turn this into an old data feed, which you can consume in a tool like Power Query. Now, before we end off this demo, just to give you an idea of what are the possibilities, remember that scenario that I was sharing earlier? Right? What happens if you have files that's sitting on some web servers where your access to it is only via FTP, but yet you want this on-demand kind of behavior for reports and stuff like that? Now, I have another package that I open here, right? And what you see in this package is simply saying, hey, you know, look at all the web servers, right? Identify whether the log files there are fresh. If they are fresh file, bring it in, right, via the FTP task, and then create a local cache for it. Now, if the file is not fresh, right? No, if the file is fresh, right, then of course you just read from the local cache file. Now, similarly in this package, you'll see that you have a mix of a control flow, logic that you want to express as you're shaping your data. And if I were to zoom into the data flow, one of the things that you'll see here is still a data streaming destination, right? So up to this point in time, you saw two things. You saw the data streaming destination. You saw the wizard. Now, the last piece that I'm going to show you here is how does this SSIS OLEDB provider look like, right? Now, on this machine, I've already installed the SSIS OLEDB provider. If I were to go into link server, go into SSI providers, you will see an entry here called the SSIS OLEDB provider. And essentially, this SSIS OLEDB provider is the one that is communicating with the data streaming destination and doing all this magic that allows you to make an SSIS package available as a data feed.
And so that all appears automatically for you when you run the installer. That's all automatic. Right? And there's just one setting that you need to change, just so they know. You have to enable, what's it called? The allow in process. Once you enable that, then it all works right after running the MSI. So let's go back to the slides. Okay, so a lot of people see that and they say, okay, cool. And other people see that and say, why would I ever want to use this? There are some very interesting scenarios. The reason why we call this complex data feeds is this makes sense where you're not just reading from a table, where there's actually control flow logic that you want to do, where you want to pull things on demand. I blogged about this a while back, but here's the three main scenarios, or three high-level scenarios here. This is probably the number one request. I have an SSIS report, I have some report, I want to kick off an SSIS package. I'm not just reading from a table, I need to do something, apply some logic, and then get the data back. Right? So using this approach, you can actually have, from SSRS's point of view, it just thinks it's running a SQL query, but really in the background that's launching an SSIS package, doing its processing, and returning the results back. Conceptually similar to the data management gateway. It is. So, and we'll talk about that in actually our session tomorrow and how these things work together. Yeah. Is there a question there? So the question is it possible to split the data flow and also write it into the table? Yes, definitely. Your limitation is you can only have one data streaming destination, because that's what's going to be exposed, but your package can also do other things as well.
I think today one of the things that we've been seeing when we talk to customers is that they take a gigantic SSIS package that's doing ETL, right, breaking this up into smaller package that does E, T, and L, right? Today, in order for you to be able to do this kind of pattern, right, you need to land the data somewhere in some intermediate storage. Now, with this capability, right, then there's the possibility that you could chain it up without ever landing data anywhere.
Yeah, right? You can chain flow to flow, Andy.
What's your feel for performance?
So performance is actually, so if you have something that's running all the time or needs to be kept fresh or whatever, you should be doing traditional ETL, schedule dump to a table. It's faster reading from a table and kicking off an SSIS package. That said, we've done a lot of performance enhancements to return you the first set of rows, so streaming starts as soon as possible. So we kind of changed the way we do the buffering a little bit in this destination. But there's definite overhead for launching those. That said, one of the reasons we took the link server approach is link servers also support a thing called distributed query. Right? It lets a provider describe things about the destination, in this case the SSIS package, and lets you do stuff like query folding. So for example, if you have a filter on your source query, you could push that down to the SSIS package. Now we don't do that today, but that's one of the reasons we followed the link server approach, because it means it's something that we can do in the future. Okay? Yep.
Maybe can we do the role-based multicasting so that you can have an existing package and have just a piece of this thing?
So the question is, can we do row-based multicasting so you have your regular package as well as the data streaming destination? Yeah, that works as well.
So right now, I think the restriction, which the wizard will check, is that for each of the package, right, there is one data flow, and in this data flow, there's only one data streaming destination, right? If you have 2 or 3 of them, it will confuse it, and you will only take the first one.
Yeah. Question?
Is this a concept, or is this actually going to be?
Good question. Is this a concept, or is actually, this is available now for download. It's available now from the Microsoft Download Center. It's called the Complex Data Feed Components, or Data Feed Publishing Components.
It's a very long name. It's Data Feed Publishing Components. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's 2012. Yeah. So that's available today. Yeah, fully supported, everything like that. Again, it's pitched as part of the Power BI scenario, because we'll talk about in our gateway talk. It plays an important role there, but this is just a generally available component for 2012 as well. So on-demand execution from reports, definitely a big thing. On-demand execution of SSIS packages in general. This is interesting. A customer came to us with this first scenario about auditing. They do auditing of databases and different things. They embed all their logic inside of SSIS packages. They don't trust the people they're auditing to run these packages for them. They want to use this on-demand execution so they can force that execution to be run in real time. It doesn't land anywhere. The data just comes directly back to them, which is an interesting scenario. The other thing was about infrequently used data feeds. This was actually an internal thing at Microsoft. There was this group that had about 500 different data feeds that are used infrequently. But when they're used, they're really important. The business users need the data right away, but they'll mostly sit idle, and they'll only be interesting for a couple of days at a time, and then nobody touches them again. Okay, so to keep this huge infrastructure of 500 different data feeds up to date, they had a big infrastructure always running a refresh and keeping it up to date. What they wanted was this on-demand execution instead, so they could kick off an SSIS package. If the data isn't fresh, they would refresh it and then stream the results back and then just stream from there. And they had built this into their processes. And of course, an alternative to link servers. So you want to connect to DB2. You want to connect to other sources that may not have OLEDB providers that you can plug into SQL Server. You can actually use an SSIS package and expose that as an alternative. I don't think I've seen the perf test, but the way SSIS streams data, it's definitely possible that in a lot of scenarios, your SSIS will perform better than a regular OLEDB provider. Yep. The question is there any data distribution statistics? That's actually one of the requirements for integrating with distributed query. Currently, we don't do that. So we don't do statistics. We don't do analysis of what the package is doing. That's a potential enhancement for the future, but that's not there yet. Question is, what kind of permissions does the user need by default?
So right now, it follows the SSIS model, execute as caller. Whoever that invokes the query, your identity pass all the way through. Yep.
And the identity passer is an important thing, because if you're doing multiple hops, you're going to have that constrained delegation issue. So it's something to keep in mind. Yeah. The question is, does each execution of the query open up a session? Yeah, so every time you do a select star from that view, it's going to kick off the SSIS package and stream the results back. If you run another one, it's going to launch a separate package, because SSIS packages always run independently. They don't, yeah.
Now, one more thing to add, right, is that if you have been following SSIS 2012, all these rich reports that's coming, right, anytime you run anything on a select star on an SSIS package, your reporting and all this logging all happens automatically in the background, meaning that you could leverage some of the capabilities that we introduced in SSIS 2012 to do performance troubleshooting as well, right? So all this you get for free. Right?
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. Let me run through these last things. This is one more question. The question is about security settings. So that comes down to the SSIS permission model. That's what Hyong was talking about. So about securing whoever has access to those packages themselves, and also the SQL view as well. Yeah, so the security would be done there. Yeah. So quickly, I just want to talk about, this is more of the the fuzzy future stuff that I can't talk about in real terms. But this is something that's been coming up more and more. 2-3 years ago, people kept saying, I want SSIS in the cloud. And we're like, great, we'll build it for you. And then we're like, well, wait, what are you trying to do? And they said, well, we don't know. And we said, okay, well, where's your data? Like, okay, well, it's sitting on-prem. I'm like, okay, so why do you want to pull it up to the cloud for processing? And they said, we don't know. Like, okay, well, let's take a look at this and look at the different scenarios and things like that. Now that more and more data is actually moving to the cloud, and there's more and more cloud processing going on, this whole data movement in the cloud, this ETL in the cloud, starts to make more sense. And it's definitely possible today. This isn't just a future thing. I'm going to talk about some different scenarios. Hyong and I actually did a hybrid talk at PASS last year that got a whole 5 attendees. So I think we were ahead of our time. But anyways, one of the key things for data movement from the cloud is being able to reach back to the on-prem data and access your corporate data sources, which is why the data management gateway is part of Power BI, why it's something that is interesting for us, and why people from the SSIS team actually worked on that project for Power BI. You'll start to see the relationship there. So let me just quickly blow through some of these main scenarios. This is the standard. I'm running SQL Server in a VM in Azure. I'm running SSIS on-prem. I'm pushing up to Azure, and maybe I'm pulling down from my databases there. I could also be running SSIS in the cloud. The key thing here is from the cloud, you can't reach down on-prem without something like the use of the data management gateway. But there's a thing called Azure Virtual Networks that lets you domain join your Azure VMs with your on-prem networks that actually allows this sort of connectivity. Hybrid ETL, this is the scenario that those SQLCAT source and destination, the blob source and destination, that's where they come in handy, where you start your processing on-prem, you dump it to a cloud destination, and resume the processing in the cloud to do the loading. You can get very good load rates when you have SSIS running within your SQL Server VM in the cloud. This is a very interesting one, too. This is at TechEd. A customer came up to me and started asking. It was the first time a customer asked where we talk about a solution, and he says, yes, but will it run in Azure? And that was great, seeing that the message is getting out there. In this case, they have a number of different remote sites that they pull data from. So pulling data across the cloud or across the internet is something they have to do anyways. So moving their processing to the cloud made a lot of sense for them. And in their case, they do all their processing at the end of the month. They do this large batch process and pull from all the things at the end of the month. So what they do is they spin up VMs on demand. Right? So they had a PowerShell script that at the end of the month would run, provision all their VMs, kick off their SSIS packages, shut down all their VMs at the end of the processing, and that was it. They don't have any on-prem resources for that processing. They just do all the processing in the cloud, put it to a database, and then pull it down to their final destination at the end. It was a really, really neat solution. It saved them a lot of money. Cloud-to-cloud processing, you can do this today. SSIS runs in a SQL Azure VM. Right? You connect to your cloud data sources, moving from one to another. Finally, quickly, an alternative to using SSIS, an alternative data movement technology is called Azure Data Sync. Anybody using Data Sync or has tried Data Sync? A couple people. Data Sync is meant to be a really easy tool. If you have on-prem data and you want to keep it in sync with the cloud, you install Data Sync and it just works. It just starts syncing. You can do one-way syncs, two-way syncs. It uses a hub and spoke model. So you're going to go to an Azure hub that can then go to multiple Azure databases or multiple on-prem databases. It's all, Data Sync will do the one-way or two-way, and you can control how often it syncs and how your changes propagate, things like that. Very cool. And that was a very quick review of that. So things you can try out now. There's the SSIS report pack. There's the complex data feeds that I forgot to include up here. And there's those DQS extensions that are out there. Coming soon, those new SQL Azure connectors, the HDinsight stuff, OData source, and the new SSDT BI release will be coming out. Actually, it should be out very soon. Yeah. Those first two things, the report pack and the DQS, those are both on Codeplex. Yeah. After this, on my blog, mattmason.com, I'll be posting links to all of these things. Mark? Components to create and destroy Azure VMs. That hasn't been planned, but that is a very interesting scenario that I'd like to hear more about if you have specific requirements around that. But yeah, you have a control flow that lets you visually lay out. Yeah, it's interesting. Phil? Question, very important question that everybody's missing because they're walking out the door, but will we get colors back in the new SSDT? Yeah, I won't repeat the customer feedback, verbatim feedback that we got about that because I'm not allowed to swear on stage. But no, so that's actually a Visual Studio theming. They have done some theming, some changes, our icons. So as someone who is on the product team and went and spent a ridiculous amount of time reviewing our icon changes for 2012, for SQL Server 2012, only to have them completely changed again in Visual Studio 2012, yes, I feel the pain. But yeah, there will be some color changes, but nothing major. It's still going to be matching the Visual Studio theming. But OK, so we're over time. Please fill out evals. And we'll both be around to answer questions. We'll be down at the pavilion. We'll even be giving away books on Friday morning down in the pavilion as well. So thanks a lot.
Hey, hi. Hey, nice.